So I was having this whole thing last night. I couldn't sleep, and I was trying to remember how matrices work. If you put numbers in binary, I couldn't remember how to put a number in binary.
Keanu Reeves.
Welcome to the 17th segment, an official podcast of Good Morning BT.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 17th segment. We are here for episode 4. Can you believe it?
Know what that means?
They haven't canceled us yet.
Citizens on Patrol.
Which one was that?
If you get it,
that
you
was
get it.
Police Academy.
Or it could be A New Hope. See?
Star Wars.
That's right.
Right, which was actually episode 1.
Yeah, I understood both those references.
That's for you, Steve.
Is Citizens on Patrol the Police Academy where the guy goes through the revolving door and says, "What a lobby"?
Yes, it is.
My favorite one.
Citizens on Patrol, which
My
is
favorite line.
It's after, like, I think Police Academy 3 was the zenith, and 4 is where it started jumping the shark, and then there was a 5 and a 6, and I think there was a 7, and it's really sad that I know all that, but
And I'm sure
it's
you've
what
seen
lives up here and finds its way either on the radio or sometimes to here. The 17th segment, which, like we say, 4 episodes in. We have a lot of stuff today that I think sort of goes in the category of we didn't get to it.
Yeah, we keep getting sidetracked in these things. Imagine that. We go down some kind of weird rabbit hole. One of the things that we didn't get to was the fact that Bo has a scar on his face and wore cowboy boots as a child. In episode 2, I think started, or episode 3 maybe,
Yes.
we started that conversation.
An Attack of the Clones, or was it back in training? Yes, and it's funny to go back and watch and listen to it. And by the way, watch and listen. This is the one thing that we do that actually has a video component.
So you can see us.
That's right. And maybe that's driven you back to the radio. I don't know. But
So really quickly, you got your scar that's in your beard. You can't see it. He has a scar in his mustache.
that just sounds all kinds of weird. You got your scar, which is in your beard.
But he got it. He started the conversation by saying, "I used to wear cowboy boots," and then I said, "Did you wear cowboy boots with shorts?" And then it became a conversation about his knees, which then became a conversation about my big toe.
Which became, bye, we're
exactly.
gone.
So why do you have boots on, and why do you have a scar?
So when I was in about kindergarten, I used to wear boots to school every once in a while. Just,
As one does.
accessorize. But I wear boots to school, and then in my backyard, we used to have like a jungle gym that you could go play on, and we
Like
had
a
some
little
swing
play
set.
set.
Yeah, and I used to like to get on the monkey bars and walk across them.
I used to do that.
And I did it one night or one day
In your boots?
cowboy boots, and I fell through. I don't know if I fell through or to the side of the monkey bars, and then gouged this little area of my under my nose on a rock. And let me tell you, I was the coolest kid in kindergarten for about a month because
Get stitches?
I was gone for a few days, and it was kind of like, what happened to him? Is he ever going to come back? He was wearing cowboy boots, but I had this big old bandage, and then I got stitches, and I was the first kid on the block and at school that anybody knew that had stitches, especially somewhere like this where you can see it.
Well, and I don't even see the scar.
Because I've got
Hair.
whiskers.
So if you were clean
You'd
shaven, would
absolutely
I see it?
Yep. So
Really?
no, we are not going to shave tomorrow. on the
So
air.
if that was a cliffhanger for you from episode 1 about Bo's boots and how he got the scar, we have now closed that entire loop for you. We've
See you next time on episode 5.
that's the only story we have to get to. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about this week, because we've had so many since last week's episode. We've had so many amazing phone calls from our listeners during our regular show, Good Morning BT. And again, I will say this, if you hear the podcast and you've never listened to the show, you can go to WBT.com or anywhere you get your podcast and listen to Good Morning BT. But also, this is the companion to that. But on the show itself, we've had so many amazing phone calls that we've gotten from listeners. And it's the thing that I love so much about radio that was just not possible in the 20 odd years that I worked in TV.
You can't do it in TV.
You can't.
The beauty of radio, and whenever anybody asks me, why not TV? And I actually did. I spent 3 years as a producer in TV, and during that time,
At a station, I just about spit my gum out. At a station that I worked
she's
at
got the
as
gum
well.
in her mouth this
I
week.
do. I can't not do
I
it.
don't. Again, this is a tangent within a tangent. But before we started rolling here, or maybe Steve got this. I don't know. Steve never tells us when he starts.
Yeah, we're just up
we've
here
been
chatting.
Podcast been going on for 15 minutes. What took you so long? But Beth has gum in the roof of her mouth, and it's like flattened in the roof of your mouth. And she said, and I can see it right now, but it looks like a retainer that's not connected by anything. But so you said to me, and you're like, here it is. Let's see. It's up here. And I said, you used to wear that on TV? You used
All
to do
the time.
Same? So what if you're in radio is one thing. If it falls out, maybe you can sort of hear the inflection in your voice. But if you're on TV, like it just falls out in the middle of you were the lead anchor on the NBC affiliate here in Charlotte, WCNC.
Yeah.
You and Fred Shropshire.
Yep.
I just like to say that. And your gum was there the whole time?
Whole time.
That would probably freak the news director out if they knew that.
I freaked the news director out.
Didn't take gum.
It didn't matter about the gum. It was just all of me freaked the news director out because that was one of the biggest complaints. This is such a weird thing to say out loud. One of the biggest complaints they had about me was that I had too much personality and that it made viewers uncomfortable. Because
I never complain about that. I'm just, every day I'm like, can you please say something?
But I used to, Fred would say something, or if there was like an emotional story, we used to sit really, really close. I would touch his arm, or I'd say something and I'd touch his arm. And
he didn't like that, did he?
No, the news director said to me one day, I got pulled into the office, and he said to me, like, Beth, you can't touch your co-anchor. It makes people really uncomfortable. And I was like, what? And my argument always was in television that it would be, especially local TV now, would get more viewers if they would let people just be more like people, just chit chat. I mean, not chit chat, because you do have a job that
what's going on?
that you are doing, and you're trying
Pretty crazy
to,
about the weather, huh?
Right. You're trying to deliver facts, and you're trying to, and you want to tell a story well, but I think that I would get emotional. There were certain stories that would I cried on the air, and when things like that happened, I often had a sit down moment in the office where they were like, Beth, you can't emote on the air. You can't touch your co-anchor. So yes, if he had known that on top of all of that he was already dealing with, that I also had gum in my mouth, probably would have freaked out. But I did it because I was sitting so close to Fred. And we had the 6 o'clock news that we anchored, so 6 to 6:30, and then we had this long break before the 11 o'clock news. So, I mean, sometimes you would go out and report and do packages and stuff, but a lot of times I would just go like grab dinner by myself, because you guys, if you listen to the show, I love to eat alone.
She likes to,
I
solo
love
seats
it.
at bars.
I love to eat alone and sit with a book, and I would do that. And if I had like a Caesar salad or something, I don't want to come back into the news blowing croutons.
Well, maybe
if co-host.
I've talked to Fred once because he was on our show a while back.
Yeah.
And maybe if I asked him, I said, "Did you know Beth had gum in her mouth the whole time?" He goes, "Yes, thank God." Maybe he would.
He might have said.
Maybe
yes,
I'm
thank
thinking
God.
about this the whole wrong way.
But I wish in those moments, back to the phone call thing, that when I was having these conversations with news directors and things where they were saying, Beth, don't be emotional, or Beth, you have too much personality, or Beth, you talk too loud, or whatever the complaint was. I wish in those moments that I had an ability to have conversations with the viewers where they could say like, no, you don't talk too loud, or maybe they would say, yes, you do. Anyway, all of those things, I am exactly who I am. There's no version of me that can be different, because that would just be too much work.
So you want it to be like Ferris Bueller or like Wayne's World, where in the middle of the segment you'd be like, "Do you believe this?
Yes.
Can you believe what's happening here?"
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Just because you're kind of breaking the fourth wall the whole time because you're looking at the camera. But if I could just have if in the news, an aside camera where you'd say, "Can you believe this story? This is a story that we're not going to cover again. We're going to tell you the awful headline, and then we're never going to come back to it and give you a resolution." And that's what used to hurt my heart so much, because half the time the stories were the worst moments in someone's life, just the worst day of someone's life. And we're, reporting on it. And a lot of the time we didn't get any follow-up. So that part of it always, because you could do the human experience is so complex that you could do an entire newscast on one person's life story, and it would probably be fascinating if you told the story well,
No, it's true. You have to, in this business, you have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to.
I don't do that well because I do wear my emotions on my sleeve. It's why, I've lost my composure multiple times in a lot of ways on the radio station. I've cried on the show multiple times. You hear it every day. I laugh every day. But I don't have that ability to compartmentalize. It doesn't. People used to say that to me.
I think you do. I just think that your threshold for when something can pierce it is lower than most. Maybe. But that's what makes you who you are. It's what makes you great. But because I think when people, listen to you, they know that it's not a scripted thing. Our whole show. Yeah. I would like to think that when you listen to us, and the reason that it's been successful, we've been doing it for 3 years. That's longer than some shows even ever get to be around.
If you count the times that I filled in, because I filled in with you a couple of times a week for almost a year before we started the official Good Morning BT. So we've been working together now for
almost 5.
Yeah, almost 5 years.
Yeah, because when we talk about the 3-year thing, you're right. That year between when Pat McCrory left to go run for office and we had fill-in people, anybody who paid attention to how many times people had been on the show. Beth won that battle after 6 months. It wasn't even a contest.
He kept asking me back, and I was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want me back?" Because at the time, I was also doing Charlotte Today on WCNC. This was during the COVID era where we were doing the show from home. So I was doing TV in the afternoons, and I would come in the mornings and do the radio with him, and then run home and try to fix my hair, and then do Charlotte Today with Eugene Robinson. And that was all happening at the same time. And a lot of people don't know if the two things coincided. That I was filling in when Colleen Odegaard left, who's back on that show now, which is so cool. I love her.
So you're not getting ready to go fill in for her.
No,
sorry.
No,
that's not how
but
it works.
at the same time that you and the radio station came to me and said, "Do you want to create this new show?" Charlotte Today asked if I would just come in and be their full-time host, and I loved the idea that I got to work with Bo, because I don't know how to express this enough, and I think I've said it in all kinds of different ways. But I've so enjoyed every co-host that I've ever had, and I've been friends with the co-hosts that I've had over the course of my career. But my whole career, I didn't know that I was looking for him. That I was trying.
Second place is the first loser.
But you find you're.
I'm just kidding.
Do you know what I mean? I was looking. You were I don't know what it is about. We became fast friends instantly after we met. But when you meet the person that you got, we think alike, and we work. We have the same work ethic, and it just works. I don't know why. It's that thing that you can't teach it. You can't teach it.
We did a couple of shows, and by the third show, I knew. Okay, it wasn't whether or not I wanted her to be on the show, it's whether or not we could orchestrate it. Can we make this happen? Because there are a lot of things that had to happen to take the show from a solo show to a joint show, and then not just bring in anybody, but bring in somebody with Beth's experience and track record. It was something that I thought, okay, I'd love to do this, but can we will this into happening? And as you know, and listeners know, if they sort of listened and followed the process, it took a while, but it was well worth it once we finally did it. It's funny, we got you in place 3 days before our 100th anniversary. Yeah. And I wanted that to happen because I wanted to have you part of that whole thing, and I wanted it to make sense, and we wanted to get the ball rolling. And then, of course, Beth was here for 2 days, and I said, I got tickets to the Masters. I'm leaving for 4 more days.
And I had to do the show by myself, and I was coming from a world of television into this medium that I had not done a lot, and tried to figure this out. And I still whenever we are one of us, you can hear people walking through the building right now. Whenever
there's no podcast being recorded here. Yeah, I wasn't informed of this.
As we've said multiple times, we are in the basement in a random. Yeah, so it happens.
Kind of breezy today.
But we had, I still, when Bo is not with me on the show, those first days were kind of a nice just throw me into the deep end of the pool and see if I sink or swim. But it still feels just different and off whenever you're not there. And I guess it probably feels the same when I'm
vice
not.
versa. I've said this to her on the air and off the air, but it's like both of us have been around the block in this business. When I say business, I mean broadcasting. We've done various things. I even spent I spent enough years in TV to understand how it works and also to understand that I like radio better.
Yeah.
But we've both been in this for a long time. So when we can do the show by ourselves. It's not that can you do it. It's what happens when you combine forces. What happens in that kind of magic and that kind of unwritten language where we know what the other's about to do. Like it is like almost a daily occurrence. We have, as you know, 16 segments to fill on a daily show. And now we have a 17th right here. But when we go about filling in those blanks, you and I come in with all different avenues and options we can go down.
Right. We've read 100 stories over the course of the day before that we send to each other if we find them interesting, that we think could become a great conversation, that we think could become something that's interesting to people who listen.
And we have sort of a blueprint of sort of obvious things that we'll cover. And then we have spots, sometimes we'll call them one-offs where we'll talk about one thing, but we know it's just going to be that segment. Then we have other ones where we sort of put in the category of talkers or things that could get the phones going. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes it takes 2 or 3 segments to kind of get it rolling and then it explodes. But we know coming in all these different options we have, but it's almost a daily occurrence where we get to a spot and we're thinking, what should we do here? And I'll be looking at my phone and then I'll pick it up and I'll say, hey, and as I'm turning to Beth to show her what it is, she holds up her phone and she's looking at the same thing.
The exact same thing. Our brains will be so on the same track that we're showing each other the exact same story that we want to talk about. It happened today, today being June, I never can know the date, the 12th, the 11th, the 12th? 12th, June 12th.
2023, everybody knows
we
that.
were
talking. Happy birthday, Steve's mom.
Happy birthday, Steve's mom.
Oh, today.
Yeah, today's her birthday. We were supposed to say it on the air today.
And that means whenever you listen to this podcast, it's still Steve's mom's birthday.
Happy birthday, Steve's mom. If only we could play your dad's birthday song for her.
No, trust me, we don't have the rights to play it on this podcast. That's what I've been told.
But today,
way too expensive.
Today, when we were talking about, we lost Brian Wilson yesterday, 82 years old, one of the founding members of the Beach Boys and just this musical genius who created so much of the Beach Boys music. And we were talking about him and also playing our interview last week with Mike Love. And we talked about that interview with Mike Love on this podcast last week. We were going to read some of the tributes that other musicians had said online, some of the things that people had said online about Brian Wilson. And I had Paul McCartney's up because what he said was just so lovely. And I looked at Bo and I was like, you should, this is during a commercial break. And he said, I told him, I said, you should read John Stamos's. And he immediately held up his phone. He said, oh, that's funny. I have a screenshot and I have it up already, ready to read it.
I already have John Stamos up.
John Stamos. So we have these moments where we're absolutely on the same brain wave. And it's, I've never had a working partner where it works that way, that we pretty consistently are on, we're thinking alike, we're thinking about the show in the same way, we're headed in the same direction. And Bo's the only person who, unlike news directors I've worked with, who's not terrified of all of the weird crazy that might come out of my mouth.
Now, I do say a lot of times, we finish a segment and I say, what just happened?
Which, that happened today. We started this and we just went down a whole tangent. We started this conversation to talk about the amazing phone calls that we get and the interactions that we get to have with listeners. June 12th, you need to go back and listen to the beginning of the 8 o'clock hour. We had a phone call mark that you just can't, it's one of those things where you're like, what just happened?
And so Steve, who is the producer of this podcast, Steve, pop up here for a second.
Yes, sir.
Because this is where Steve, he has many jobs on the show, as any producer would, and I always used to be a producer, so we get how it all works because we've been there. But Steve is sort of our last line of defense. When I say defense, I mean, look, you need a call screener at a station for various reasons. But, at a base level, you're just making sure that, first of all, people who call in who say they want to be on the air are calling the right station.
Right.
Or they're not drunk. At least they don't appear to be.
Or they don't say a lot of bad words.
Right. And so Steve is generally going to let you on the air if you tell him that you have some sort of coherent. And it's not like we tell you, what are you going to say verbatim? But we want to make sure that you're sort of in the ballpark of what we're talking about, because
topic-wise,
it messes up a segment if we're talking about, Brian Wilson and somebody calls in and wants to talk about what
tinnitus.
Tinnitus. Oh, God. I didn't have that one on my list. Okay, make sure we come back to that. Because the reason
I'm taking a note.
Okay. Yeah. Steve is our call screener most of the time. Except when he leaves the room, and then Beth picks up the phone and says he's in the bathroom.
Are we going to do this on the podcast now?
I do it every opportunity I get.
I love picking up the phone and talking to people. I love it when we're in a commercial break and if Steve's in the bathroom and I get to talk.
And we're not afraid to do that. I've worked on shows where the host will be like, "I don't do such things. That's beneath me." No. We all came up doing this, and there was a period of time where we didn't have a Steve. For a long stretch. And so for a certain part of the show, it had to be you and me, because we had a board operator, which is what Bernie does, but Bernie can't do everything at once. So there'd be plenty of times in the early days where we'd run around the console and go answer the phone. And a lot of times people are like, "Hey, I want to say this to Bo." And I'm like, "This is Bo." And they're like, "What?"
Say it.
Yeah, say it. Go ahead. But it's always funny. But anyway, so Steve screens the calls. And it's funny because there are a number of moments over the last year or so when Steve's been with us, where Steve has put something up on the board that I can read, and I say,
it'll be a year in just over 2 weeks, Bo.
That's exactly right.
It's almost been with us a year.
Because you came right before we went
July
to the beach.
1. Yeah, July 1 last year.
But Steve, I mean, you can vouch for this. There have been several times in the last year where you've looked over at me, or actually I looked over at you based on what you wrote on the screen, and I said, "Are we sure we want to take this call?" Like, I'm the guy who's like, how does this person sound? Are they locked into what we're doing? Because that's part of producing a good segment. If you bring callers into it, you just want to make sure that it's going to reinforce, not necessarily agree with what you're saying if you're debating something, but just make sure that they're going to add something to it based on what Steve can, discern
Glean
by
from
listening.
them, yeah.
Glean, yeah, that's a fancy word.
Here, just so that you can get a sense of what we have in front of us. So
Glean.
So Steve has a computer system. As he's taking the phone call, he writes in people's names for what line they're on, and then there's a section. It kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet where he can write a basic summary of what the person wants to talk about. And then Bo and I each have a computer screen in front of us, so that we can see the name of the person, we can see what line they're on, and we can see kind of what it is that they want to talk about. And then there's a whole section. There's a little square at the bottom of the screen where Steve can put extra notes, where sometimes he puts like funny nicknames or like extra
gleaning,
extra stuff.
Right. If you guys are talking about a particular topic, or you have a like, "Oh, I don't know, what year was it that was the thing?" And of course I can really quickly maybe Google something, or if I happen to know something off the top of my head, I can just drop a comment in that box. And then when I click the button, it pops up like a red light almost on your screen.
Hey, I got it. You know how we may or may not be in front of a green screen?
It's a glean screen.
It's a glean screen.
A glean screen. I said a glean screen.
It's a glean screen. Anyway,
but Steve is great at it, because he'll say like, this may or may not be a good call sometimes.
Well, and the best calls that we've gotten, the ones that I remember,
right,
since Steve has been here, especially, but really of all time, as I think back on it, because I mean, if you said, "Okay, can you think back on a handful of callers?" Sometimes it's just the call, but a lot of times when it's the call, it becomes the caller, because that person becomes sort of like an extra personality on the show. But the times in recent memory that I can think of where that's happened, it's where Steve and I have had a conversation beforehand where I'm kind of like, "You think we should take this? Are you sure?" And my favorite in recent memory is a guy named Cohen.
Oh, we love you, Cohen.
And Cohen called the show back last week.
He emailed us today, too.
I didn't know he had email.
I know.
So now this is like multi-platform Cohen. But anyway, the day that Cohen called in, I was real, and Cohen doesn't know this, but I wasn't sure about taking the call, because I just felt like we were going in one direction, and I'm thinking, is this gonna slow this down, or is it gonna speed it up, or is it gonna just take it off in a weird direction? But Steve said, "You need to take this call." And, I trust
Right.
Steve. I trust him with everything with the show. And so I took it, and it ended up being, put it this way, this was July of last year. And
Has it been that long since Cohen first called us?
Cohen, because if memory serves, and I might be wrong about this, I want to say that when Cohen called, it was like October, November. I started in July.
I have to say no. Here's why I know. Here's why I know.
I thought it was closer to Christmas.
You can go back and look this up, because I listened to the Cohen call on the way to the beach last year for our show,
Which was August.
and that was in late August. Cohen called like a week before the beach, and I remember listening because it was such a great call. I went back and listened to it, and basically Cohen called in, and we were talking about your first dates, I think.
I don't even know. It was something about relationships, and he called in to talk about his wife, which, by the way, hashtag relationship goals. I want to be Cohen and his wife, but he told us the whole entire story about getting married and staying in like a motel for their first night. And whatever it was they had for dinner on their wedding night, he clogged the toilet. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on this long story about it, and we were all
But it kept going
rolling.
like this. He's going down there, and I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to go well. And then it goes, haha. Then it goes up, and then up. And at the very end, he's like, I'm married way the hell up.
Because he said he married the hottest woman in Belmont.
The hottest woman in Belmont.
Yep.
And said,
and she still is.
She still is.
She still is. So then...
That's what he said to me on the phone. So he calls in, anybody who's ever called the show, I always answer like, good morning, BT. And if it's a contest, good morning, BT, what's your name? Because I'm just trying to load the lines.
Good morning, BT. Steve's in the bathroom.
But it's, like, good morning, BT. And then they say whatever it is they want to comment. I'm like, okay, if I think that it's going to be a good call or that it's usable, what have you, like, okay, great. What's your name? Or when I used to work on Vince's show or on Pete's show, like, okay, what's your name? What do you want to talk about?
Right.
And Cohen he had said, oh, well, when I met my wife, and there was that particular line, she was the hottest woman in Belmont and she still is. And I was like, that's it. I was like, that's the line that will that locked me in. This is going to be a good call. So I put that on the screen in front of Bo. So the call starts, and like Bo said, it was like a riding for, and I was like,
well, we were talking about clogged toilets there for a little while.
Right. I'm like, come on, honestly, you gotta give me that line. That line is the thing that's going to really lock this in.
If you listen back to the call, I was the only one who heard, because we were all, it was all kind of chaotic, and he said the thing about clogging the toilet, and I said, wait a minute. Did you say what I think you said? And then he repeated it. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, now we got radio gold.
And he was laughing and jovial and lovely. And then he did. He's like, I married the hottest woman in Belmont. And I mean, I just fell in love with Cohen. He was the sweetest guy. So he calls again last week. And when we see Cohen's name on the screen, we answer the phone, we put him on the air, and we're like, is this Cohen with the hottest wife in Belmont? And he immediately says yes and laughs. But this is what he says at the end of the phone call. And I after the segment was over, I think I just kind of laid back in my chair and was like, I hope that my life is like this when I'm Cohen's age. He talked about, he was like, let me just say one more thing, guys, before I let you go.
Yeah, and this guy had earned every bit of that, because we were about to go, and he goes, hang on, I got one more thing.
I got one more thing.
Move back.
Yeah, give Cohen some room.
Late to news.
And he said, I went on a date night with my wife last night. And then he was just like, oh, did she look good? I loved every second of that, because they've been married. What did he say the first time he called? They've been married something like 57 years, something like that. And he still thinks that she's the hottest woman in Belmont. And she still takes his breath away when they go out on date night. And he is the most sincere, it's like the most earnest guy. And this is what I love so much about the job, that we get to have, they start this conversation with Steve, and then we have this moment where we can see who the caller might be, and then they come on the air. And today we had this guy, Mark, who called.
Again, I wasn't quite sure where it was going to go. How do you remember that happening, Steve?
Well, so again, I mean, we were having conversation just as we normally do on any number of topics. And when the phone rings, I'm, just whoever it is and what is it that they want to contribute to the conversation. And what Mark said to me on the phone was, I would like to just say to Beth, amen. I agree. Carrier pigeons are so much better than Facebook. And
I was like, pigeons better than Facebook.
Right. That's funny. I like it. You've passed the first test. So I put the call on the screen and, kind of send it along. And if Bo and Beth are going to take it, then Bo and Beth are going to take it. And Bo looked at the comment, and also I'm guessing just based on what I put on the screen, which was like, amen, Beth, carrier pigeons better than Facebook.
Right.
That Bo was like, tell him to hang on, we'll take him on the other side of news.
Right.
So I hop on, I'm like, hey, can you stick with us for a few minutes during the news break? Because this was at the top of the hour. So we come back at, 8:05, 8:06, whatever time it is. And Bo says, oh, okay, well, and actually we wanted to take a call before we move on to another topic. Let's go to Mark.
Little did we know.
Famous last words.
We were never going to move on to another topic because that entire segment became Mark.
Yeah,
it was all Mark.
The carrier pigeons comment went right out the window. The first 4 words out of his mouth.
Which I'll let you repeat. I'll let you repeat what the first words were.
Out of your mouth?
Not mine. No, out of Mark's mouth.
About the carrier? No, I don't even know. I can't even.
How he started the conversation.
Oh, he said, what did he say? I'd marry you sight unseen.
Oh, Beth, I'd marry you sight unseen.
To which Beth's response was, well, see, he likes me for my humor and for my mind.
And the rest of us in the room lost it.
Jim Zoki, especially Steve is over there in the corner laughing, which Steve has this big booming laugh, which is fantastic. Jim
you
is
need to hear me when I don't have a microphone.
Yeah, you can hear him.
Yeah.
And then Jim does this thing where he just lays down like this with his, for people who are just listening, he puts his forehead on his forearm and is kind of laid out on the desk. And I have this overwhelming need for people to feel comfortable and for people to feel welcome. So all I will do at any given moment is I will listen to what someone has to say, and I want them to feel very comfortable and happy. And so I just blew.
And obviously they do.
Just blew right past the comment. I'm like, hey there, Mark. And then Mark and I, it became this joke, this running joke inside of the room that Mark and I were having our own little conversation.
Oh, Mark was clearly the host of the show for a good 7 minutes.
And the guys were all having their own conversation. And
REO Speedwagon.
If you go back and listen to the call, you can faintly hear all of the one-liners that Bo and that Jim and that Bernie and that Steve are kind of like dropping in there because they were all having a conversation with themselves as Mark and I were trying to have the conversation about the carrier pigeon.
If you could somehow isolate the tracks, like it's 2 shows at once.
It's exactly what it is. And he somehow started talking about he doesn't like to text because he suddenly turns into like Andre the Giant or something.
That's when I lost it. Because when he said Andre the Giant, of course I'm an old school wrestling fan, so anytime you say Andre the Giant, I perk up. But then also Princess Bride. But I immediately thought of Norm Macdonald on SNL where he comes in on the Jeopardy thing and says, "Who is Andre the Giant?" And for the rest of the whole segment, that's all I could think of, and that's how my mind works, unfortunately, or fortunately. But it all sort of fed into this sort of, and we have these every once in a while. Now, if you had these every time, it wouldn't be the same thing.
Right.
But the cool thing about this show is that, as I said earlier, we don't plan this stuff.
No.
And we certainly wouldn't want to do that kind of segment every time. But every once in a while, this is what I love about all of us. We understand in this business, in this medium, that sometimes you've just got to go with it. Sometimes you've got to let it find its way. And we're lucky that we have a format where we can do that sometimes.
Yes. And a team that allows it to happen.
Right. And people ask all the time who, especially people who don't know anything about the behind the scenes of TV or radio, they assume that you guys write all this stuff, right? Like you write it down, there's a teleprompter. No. Well, no. TV, yes, in a lot of cases, but not always the case. But in this, we don't have now I've been part of shows. Quite frankly, when I took over this show, there were some parts of the show that had a script, meaning certain person says this, then you say that, and that, it is what it is. There are different kinds of shows, but when I took over, I remember telling the general manager when he asked me, "What do you want to do?" I say, "I know how long the segments are. I know this station like my backyard because I've worked here since I was a kid. I know my way around the show, but I want to build a show where we can be real and have real conversations within whatever space that is." And I believe we're doing that now. And I love the fact that there's some days where, we think we know what we're doing coming into the segment, and listeners, hey, if that's why Steve's there in the first place. But if you call on our show and you bring it, we're not afraid to let you drive it for a little while. And I think
we love it.
There are some cases where you have shows where the host would never do that. No. But I believe with what we do that on any given day, one of us will be the MVP of the show, and it's not always the same person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's somebody who calls 570-1110.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. If you have a group, like you just pointed out, a team that is that is not afraid to let that happen.
That's what's so amazing about what it is that we do together. We all trust each other enough to know that nothing bad is ever going to happen, but everybody's so confident in just who we are as people and who we are as friends to let conversations flow the way that conversations would flow if you were at dinner with your family or at dinner with your friends. And we keep that rule.
You're eating dinner. Hang on, Craig, let's take a call.
But like if you got up in the middle of dinner and like actually answered the phone, that's kind of what happens. And we let the callers do that same thing too, because we're confident enough with each other that we know that we can make lemonade out of any lemon, but most of the calls aren't ever lemons. And even the ones that are lemons end up being like the sweetest. I just did a whole lemonade thing, but they end up being the greatest calls. We had
life is a lemon and I want my money back.
What did we say today? That life was a buffet? The life is a buffet and we need to just eat from it.
It was something about a buffet.
Something about buffets. But we had another caller. This was months and months and months ago. We were doing an entire segment about interesting questions that might generate fun conversations at dinner parties, because all of us have been at awkward dinner parties where we just don't know what to say. We ended up, talking to people about packaging. Or I had one awkward moment where I stood behind a ficus tree and like ate a meatball because I just didn't know anyone and I didn't know what to say. So I ate alone behind a tree at this dinner party.
It wasn't because you didn't know anybody. It's because you're Beth Troutman.
It's just because it was normal for me to hide there and eat a meatball. But we gave people the option, like, are you brave enough to just call in and let us ask you one of these questions and then to see what kind of conversation this generates. And we asked one of the callers, it might have actually been a Brett Winterble segment. We asked him, like, if you could change personalities with anybody, like change bodies with anybody, who would it be? And
I know where this is going.
Like President of the United States, or George Clooney, or just that. Those were the kinds of answers we were getting, and then I think the guy's name was Paul. Maybe was it Paul? Calls in, and we say, "Okay, what question do you want?" And he said, "Well, I actually want the question that you guys asked Brett Winterble." And so we asked him the question, and I will let you tell the answer.
If I could switch bodies with you,
So I could switch bodies with anybody, who would it be? I think what the question was.
Yeah, and he said he would switch bodies with your husband.
Yes.
To which we were all like.
And I just, again, wanted to make him feel comfortable and welcome, so I just kind of blow right past it and keep asking questions, but then it just...
Again, all the rest of us in the room had come to a screeching halt going, okay, what just happened? And Beth is like, tell me more about this.
Tell me more about your life, Paul.
Stop.
But then it has become this joke, this thing that Jim says, I mean, almost every single day during a commercial break, or sometimes during a segment, you'll hear one of these. So it's kind of like a little Easter egg that you can be on the inside of the joke now. He'll just say, your body. And he'll do it when I'm doing like a PhD weight loss ad. Again, we love our clients, and I'll be talking about, the meal plan for your specific body. And he'll go, your body.
Just less of it.
And every time, and that's it. The PhD thing, so that call happened before I was ever here.
Yeah. Like years, like maybe 2 years before you were here.
Yeah, that's an early days Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And the Jim Zoki your body thing in the room has been a thing since I've been here, going on a year now. So now I can't not hear it. Like when you do your PhD live reads, or when I record your commercials.
Yeah. And I say your body.
And you say like, and your body creates the
GLP-1. Yeah.
Right. But every time the words your body come out of anyone's mouth, I hear Jim Zoki go, your body.
Your body.
Every time.
And it just becomes this like funny thing because that conversation with Paul, I think his name was Paul, went on for a while. Like we continued the because I go to awkward levels of wanting people to feel comfortable and happy.
Even when they say things like that. So that was a Hall of Fame call. I mean, look, we've had people, we spent a lot of time in recent weeks talking about the kids that call our show.
Oh.
Gabe Stein, who used to call on his way into school. In fact, he called in and just sounded like a regular adult caller. He
sounded
one
like
day.
a man.
And then I can't remember what it was. Like he said something about his brother being in the car, and then he kind of dropped just a line. Almost at school.
On his way to Providence Day.
Yeah, wait a minute. Like you're a student, and then he became a recurring. I mean, the kid is one of the smartest kids I've ever heard, and so he actually has been a real resource to us, given all that's happened with Israel and Gaza since a few years ago when that sort of flared up again. And he's a Jewish student at William and Mary, and he's called in and told us what the pulse of the college campus is, and he was on summer vacation a few weeks ago, sitting in studio.
He came in with us, yeah.
Yeah, so you got, and then, I remember, last week we had Myrtle. Myrtle's mom called in the show wanting to win Beach Boys tickets, and turns out this is a girl who's in the 6th grade, and
she had to go into school, so she couldn't. She was on hold too long and couldn't compete in the contest.
And her mom, and these are things I love things like this. This takes me back to the day when we had Bob Saget, the late Bob Saget, walked past the window. This is pre-Beth, but it would have happened just as well if Beth was here. But Bob Saget walks past the window, and we were having Mick Mixon on the show that day. He was the announcer for the Panthers back then. And Bob Saget walks past, and I'm like, let's see if Bob Saget, cancel Mick, let's get Bob Saget. And then in a split second, I thought, no, bring Bob Saget in. We'll just do the segment with Mick. And it was magical. And I bring that example up because a couple days ago, or was it late last week, when Myrtle called in and she had to bail because it was school time, and her mom was like, "Oh, I was holding the phone," and she was ready to go. And I said, "No." I said
she was nervous. Mom was nervous. Mom's name was Rachel,
but we coaxed Rachel into staying on
and doing the contest.
And then we asked her at the end, "Well, so you won the tickets for Myrtle?" We basically gave her the tickets.
Well, because she got the first one wrong, but when she said, "Well, it's not for me. It's so that so that Myrtle can go with her dad."
Yeah, totally caved. And so we gave her.
And I loved this moment because Bo, he's got such a good heart. I say this to him all the time. He's such a good man. He's just a good human being. And I saw it on his face. I immediately saw him melt, and he was like, "I'm going to give you a mulligan." And even though she'd gotten it wrong, he was like, "You got it right." Wrong.
And we're sitting here, and I'm looking at the clock. We're up against the news, and I'm like, I'm going to will these tickets into their hands. And so you weren't here on Monday because you were off, but Myrtle called back in
to talk about the concert. We asked her mom to ask her to, this little adorable 6th grader who won the tickets through her mom and through the kindness of Bo. And I mean, all of us, because we were, we all wanted Myrtle.
When it comes down to it, the kindness of Radio 1.
Exactly. And she called in to talk about the contest. And that's the greatest thing too, is that we get to have these experiences with listeners, even, before and after, and we develop really real relationships with people.
And we got to send a little girl and her dad to a show. Now, I know Brian Wilson wasn't at that show, but it was the last show that Mike Love played when Brian Wilson was still alive.
Right.
And you're singing all these songs out at the amp at Ballantyne. You're singing all these Beach Boys songs. And so in a weird synergistic way, Brian Williams passes away today, and you can't not think about all that last week. Yeah. And so I had a listener say, I hope that little girl realized the history that she saw, and again, didn't see Brian Wilson, but saw the history, saw his legacy, the things that he did, and will live on forever. But it's crazy how things sort of tie back around. We've had. So we had Gabe, we've had, obviously Will Timms is somebody that we have on the show from time to time who is kind of like a BT super fan who's come and spent some time with us.
And Zach Kahn.
Zach Kahn, and then I know what you're about to talk about because you're holding it in your hand.
Yes, this happened. And this is one of the times that I got choked up a little bit teary-eyed on the air. Yesterday, sometimes during commercial breaks, our program director will just pop his head into the studio. And he did that yesterday and brought us a piece of mail. And it was addressed to me and to Bo. And so I opened it up, and it was a graduation announcement for a young woman named Danica Fesperman. And she's just so lovely. And Danica is headed into the Caterpillar Think Big program at Florence Darlington Tech. And this is what it says, where she'll learn to sweet talk engines and make pistons purr. Watch out, world. There's a new mechanic in town. And then she wrote a little note to us on the envelope, and she said, Bo and Beth, thank you for starting my day off with news, laughter, and introducing me to new music, Beth. Could not have made it without your talents. I'm getting choked up again. Because you just don't know who is out there, and whether or not you're having an impact on people. And for a young woman who, I'm just going to say it, she's a badass. Like, this is really, really cool that she is doing something that isn't, the stereotypical path at all. She's going into a male-dominated field, and she's doing it with gusto, and her family is so proud of her. And I love when people showcase how amazing the human experience is. Like, we shouldn't be pigeonholed into certain ways of thinking about ourselves or behaving, or certain careers, because we are all given these remarkable talents, and Danica's using them. And for her to write a note saying, like, I could not have made it without you guys, to think that in some way that we were having I didn't mean to get this emotional, an impact, and especially
There's no
on
crying in podcasts.
I know, especially on a young person. And I guess I've talked about this on the air. I don't have children, and so if there's a chance that I have through this medium with you, Bo, had an impact on a young person, and that there's something about where I ended up career-wise, because again, we're all given these talents, and you just don't know unless you really try to break barriers and change stereotypes and things. You just don't know where you're going to end up in life. But for that note, and I don't know that Danica will ever hear this or have any idea how much it meant to us and to me personally to have this graduation announcement and a little note from a young person. You don't necessarily think about young people listening to News Talk Radio. And now we know that she does, Gabe does, Will Timms does, Zach Kahn does. And there's this entire young generation of people that we get to have relationships with because of this incredible medium. That was really long-winded and emotional.
No, it was beautiful, and it's true, and it's well articulated. Now, I'm going to throw one more in here. Now, we could do 6 more podcasts about people who've called the show, but we were going down the road of taking calls that you're not expecting. When I first started doing the show, I came on at 5 a.m. and I would always hear George Norrie's show preceding me. So I heard maybe 30 minutes of George coming into work, and it was playing right when I started my show. And there was a guy that called George's national show named Barry.
I know where you're going, yeah.
And here we are talking about young people, and Barry was obviously on the older side of our listeners. We lost Barry last year. He's not with us anymore, at least here on Earth. But Barry was an older listener with a young heart.
Oh, and was so funny and so full of life and love. And he would talk to us like we were family, because he would say on the air that he was losing his vision and didn't spend a lot of time outside of his home. And so the time he spent with us on the radio was his time to laugh. But this man was so full of light and laughter and good humor, and called us to share it with us.
He did. Now, I have to tell you a funny story. We talk about contests. It was a heartbreaking moment, but it was a totally Barry moment.
Yeah.
Because about 6 months before he died, he called our show and he won one of our contests. And when I said, "Hey Barry, you get the tickets," he said, "I don't know that I could accept these because and this was a concert that was maybe 6 months later. Not all of them are right around the corner. Sometimes
I think it was like May when he called and won, and the concert was at the end of August, something like that.
And he was totally serious, and he said, "I would rather these go to somebody else because I don't believe I'm going to be living when the concert happens."
I don't know if I'll be here for the concert.
He was having some health issues, and he wasn't sure whether he was going to make it to when the contest was, or when the concert was. And he passed away not too long after that, and that's always sort of remained in my head. But Barry was this guy who was a great call, always a positive guy, and never took things too seriously. But he got on with George Norrie all the time.
Yeah.
And like he was a regular guest on George Norrie's show, and then sometimes he would call us. And what I loved is he had been a fan of George's show, and he obviously sort of liked where we took things, and so he would stay on and listen to us. And
he called us the one day. We have a great promo that has him in it.
Oh, yeah. And I haven't taken that out of rotation because I don't think that's what he would want.
No, and because he was so funny. He's like, "You crazy kids are driving Charlotte crazy.
You bunch of idiots.
You bunch of idiots."
And I said, "The good kind of idiots, right?" "Oh, yeah."
He was like the village idiots.
And that's what he said. And he would always call us George. He's like, "George, old buddy, old pal, old friend of mine."
And just that was his nature. And again, how special is that we got to know him because of this show, and because we have, at the time, Bernie was our call screener, and Bernie developed a relationship with him, and then we developed this lovely relationship with him on the air. And so ultimately what we want people to know is that we do care about these calls that we get, and we love developing these relationships with Cohen and with Barry. And I hope I want Danica to call, with Danica and with Will Timms and with Gabe. We as much as we love being with each other, and you can hear the genuine affection that Jim and Bo and Bernie and Steve and I have for each other, you can tell that we really care about each other and love being around each other. We feel the same way about our callers. We genuinely enjoy the people who want to interact with us. And we have the pharmacist who calls in from Oakhurst Pharmacy.
That's right.
And we have Mike from Monroe who calls us, and we have Tommy who calls us, and then we have the truck driver who calls and honks his horn for us every now and again.
Jenny, who is a school teacher. We have Brandy, who said that she sits in her car and looks around and people are looking at her funny because she's laughing too hard.
I would love it if Brandy looked around someday and somebody else was laughing, and maybe they were all listening to the same show. But we thank people for you all bring us so much joy. And hopefully, so much entertainment, like the fact that Jim now will always say your body, and now it's an inside joke, you'll know.
Well, and maybe this is a good place to sort of land the podcast, the Citizens on Patrol episode of the podcast for you Police Academy fans. But the Barry story has a really cool ending, or maybe not ending, but sort of most recent thing that's happened.
Nice little bow.
Exactly.
A bow, B-O-W bow.
So Barry passed away, and we ended up talking. We actually talked to George Norrie on our show about it eventually, but we did a tribute to Barry and talked about him, and then almost a year later, George Norrie's first live show. He goes around the country and does these George Norrie live shows, and he did one at the Booth Playhouse about a month ago. And Pete Callender and I had a chance to go and introduce George Norrie on stage there. And for about 45 minutes before the show started, we had a WBT table out front, and we stood at that table and greeted listeners as they came in, and got to meet a lot of these George Norrie fans, and some of them won tickets from us. But it was about 5 minutes before the show started, and I'm kind of standing there wrapping up, talking to people, and a lady comes up and taps me on the shoulder, and she says, "Do you know who I am?" And I turned around, and she's wearing a shirt, and it says, "I'm Barry from Rock Hill's wife."
How great is that? So you got to, and they have a great picture together. But
and so she came to the show, and she actually, it's an interactive show, so she actually asked a question and was recognized during the event by George. But I thought to myself, wow, how much would Barry like this moment right now? And it just goes to show you that even after somebody passes away,
Yes.
And people that we have been on the show, we talk to, it's why I said I don't stop playing the Barry highlights, because I have no doubt in my mind that he's got that really powerful radio up there in heaven, and he's listening and watching down on us. And so there you go. Back to the whole thing about, we host this show and it's an ensemble show, but we have an extended family of callers and listeners that really are part of the show too.
We care so much about them, and maybe we can like put the little picture up that you can see Barry's wife on the video version of this. You can see
it's there.
There.
It was there when we were having that conversation.
Oh, yay.
So I know that, yes, Bo, that was a good spot to land, but because we have rabbit holed on a few other occasions, and of course we started the show going back to cowboy boots and
his
shorts
scar.
and the scar.
Yeah.
On
This
the
is
lip.
like Around the Horn or PTI, where they have the mistake guy.
Yes.
Like, these are things, not
that we
mistakes,
didn't get
but things
to?
we didn't finish.
We did not get into tinnitus. And
Okay.
I wrote it down. You made me take a note.
That's exactly
Hold
right.
on.
We told you to, and Steve, good on you, man, because I
it's going to
completely
be an
forgot about
extended
that.
episode, but I have a note in front of me that says tinnitus, and I want to make sure that we circle
Beth
back.
actually tells this better. It happened to me, but you tell it better.
Well,
than
this was before I was full-time on the show. I started filling in during the COVID era, and we started having conversations about the vaccine and COVID itself. And I had just recently had COVID. And when I got COVID the very first time, actually, I've had it twice, because I had it this year too, and it has knocked me out both times. Some people have very little issue. They lose their taste of their sense of smell and taste or something. It has just knocked me out both times for days and days and days and days. So we were talking about that on the air, and one of the side effects that people were experiencing, they kept calling us, talking about this side effect that seemed to be something universal. It's not a side effect I had, but people were talking about having tinnitus like for weeks after having COVID, which is, the ringing in your ears. And so one person said it, and then another person called and said, "Oh my gosh, I've had tinnitus too for about 2 weeks since I had it." And then another person called, and then we ended up with this lady, I don't know, called Martha or something. And she calls in and she's like, "Yes, I have tinnitus." And Bo said, so you've had the ringing in your ears too? She's like, "Yes, I can't hear the television. Sometimes I can't even hear the radio." She's something along those lines. I'm definitely paraphrasing. But then Bo said, "So did you have the vaccine?" She's like, "No." And oh, well, have you had COVID? No. So Bo's like, "Oh, so you just have tinnitus." And that was kind of the crux of the conversation. And then Bo looks at me and he's like, "What's happening?"
I said, "Okay, thanks."
And he literally looks, and I think it is all on the air. He's like, I don't know what's happening."
It's like Burgess Meredith from Grumpier Old Men. "No, there ain't no moral. I just like that story."
I just like that story. But we were glad that she called, and I'm sad that she had tinnitus, but it did not have technically anything to do with the topic we were on.
There you go, Steve.
That's the tinnitus
Receipts.
story.
Look, you asked me to write it down and make sure we came back to it.
And you did. And did I tell it right?
Oh, yeah.
It's been a while since I've told that story.
And even if you didn't, the story didn't have a point. She just had tinnitus.
Right. She's got tinnitus.
Tune in next week for episode 5.
We good?
Good.
All right.
Listen to Good Morning BT with Bo Thompson and Beth Troutman live weekdays 6 to 10 on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.